A single cotton thread, wrapped around a wrist, carries a long and varied history. Following this string backward in time leads away from the modern living room and into the centers of political uprisings, imperial battlefields, and cosmic wars. Most people recognize this setup as Raksha Bandhan. It is typically a domestic celebration where siblings exchange gifts and sweets to honor their family ties. The terminology identifies the specific purpose of the day. In Sanskrit, Raksha means protection, and Bandhan means a bond or tie, a bond of protection. However, historical and mythological records show that for most of its existence, this custom had nothing to do with siblings. It began as a tool used in divine warfare, evolved into a mechanism for geopolitical survival, and eventually served as a physical focal point for a mass civilian rebellion. When the gift-giving is stripped away, what remains is a specific cultural mechanism, a physical marker used to formalize a debt of protection. The Bhavishya Purana describes an era where a 12-year conflict raged between the ancient gods and the demons. Lord Indra, the king of the gods, was facing imminent defeat. His forces were retreating, and he required a new source of strength to hold his ground. Before he returned to the battlefield, his wife, Sachi, took a cotton thread, infused it with sacred mantras, and tied it to his right wrist. The first recorded Rakhi was a marital talisman. It was a victory charm meant to provide a warrior with spiritual defense in a time of war. Eventually, the thread's meaning expanded. It moved beyond marriage and became a way to forge alliances and claim new responsibilities between people who were not related by blood. In the Mahabharata, when Lord Krishna cut his hand, Draupadi immediately tore a piece of her own clothing to bandage him. Krishna viewed this spontaneous act of care as a binding contract, promising to protect her whenever she called for him. Another shift appears in the story of the goddess Lakshmi, who traveled in disguise to the court of the demon king, Bali. By tying a sacred thread to Bali's wrist, she established a brother-sister relationship that allowed her to negotiate for a specific favor, the release of her husband, Lord Vishnu. Bali accepted the bond. He surrendered his capture and released Vishnu to honor the commitment represented by the thread. These narratives established a precedent in the culture. The strongest commitments to protect others were no longer restricted to the family you were born into. They were actively chosen. This concept of chosen allegiance eventually moved out of scripture and onto actual battlefields, where it began to alter the movements of literal armies. During the Greek campaigns in India, the wife of Alexander the Great reportedly sent a Rakhi to the Hindu king Porus, seeking safety for her husband. On the battlefield, Porus reportedly halted his strike against Alexander when he saw the thread on his own wrist. He chose to honor the vow he had made to Alexander's wife, even at the cost of a military advantage. By 1535, the thread was being used to bridge religious divides. The Hindu queen Karnavati of Chittor was facing a brutal siege she could not survive alone. She sent a Rakhi to the Muslim Mughal emperor Humayun, appealing to him as a brother for aid. Humayun was in the middle of a military campaign in Bengal, but upon receiving the thread, he abandoned his own objectives and marched his army toward Chittor to defend his newly adopted sister. The Rakhi had become a high-stakes diplomatic tool, used to create mutual defense pacts between rival empires and differing faiths. In 1905, the British Empire attempted to partition Bengal along religious lines, using a divide-and-rule strategy to weaken the local population. To counter this, the poet Rabindranath Tagore repurposed the Rakhi as a symbol of mass political unity. On October 16, 1905, thousands of people took to the streets of Kolkata in a public demonstration. Hindus and Muslims tied threads onto one another's wrists, pledging to protect their neighbors and maintain their community despite the British attempts to separate them. The ritual had reached its largest scale, serving as the binding agent for a national resistance movement. Today, the festival has returned to a smaller, more intimate setting. The mass demonstrations and imperial marches have faded into the quiet environment of the home. Today's celebration has inherited the architecture of these earlier eras. The grand treaties of the past have been adapted into a private, domestic commitment. It remains a reminder that in this tradition, love is expressed through a specific, active responsibility to look out for the safety of another. This exchange connects millions of people, every year, across different ages, backgrounds, and global distances. The physical act of tying the thread remains the central moment of the day. A piece of cotton that once halted armies and organized cities continues to serve as a way to define their most essential loyalties.
Like, share, and subscribe for more interesting videos.